Hello and welcome to my exhibition of photomontage. Photomontage that are arrangements of photographic prints and bits of photographic prints which are stuck onto paper and then onto coloured card. And that just about deals with technique. It's all very simple. So let's talk about something else. But talking can be a bit dodgy when it's talking about art. And I want to say at the outset that my work, like anybody else's, must be judged on its merits, and nothing that I can say can in any way prop it up if it's found to be deficient, and that's for other people to decide. But there may be things that can be said that apply to the exhibition as a whole, and that's what I'd like to deal with at the now. In my statement, which I hope was not too pretentious, I said that I was brought up in Cornwall, and that is true. I was brought up on a part of the south coast of Cornwall which was special because it was opposite a small island. It was a very small island, just a hill and a wood, a beach, 2 houses and some rocks, and it was less than a quarter of a mile offshore. But it has meant a huge amount in my life. And I suppose, as an artist, it's been important because it represents an image. And I can draw in my head the outline of that island as a mental image, a mental construct. And I could draw it on paper, the outline. But it's much more than that, because an image needs something round it. Of course, you can leave the island and you can, theoretically, you could go to the South Atlantic or South China Sea. But what is important for the image is a certain amount of water, the water between our home and the near edge of the island, a bit of water on either side, and what we could see in perspective of the water beyond it and the horizon. Well, I think that this is important, trying to decide how much to have around an image. And it's important in a more general sense because it's true of us as people that I don't end where my skin or my clothes end, because there's a certain amount of space that I occupy that can be thought of as personal, that I own. When we talk about don't invade my space, that refers to something that I think is true, and it's true of sculpture and to some extent of buildings, of architecture. But it's also true of images in 2 dimensions. And for me, it's very important to get that relationship between the mount, the field, or the space around the image, and the image itself. I'm very fond of rugs, Middle Eastern rugs, and there's a certain class of rugs called Transylvanian rugs, which are peculiar because they have a wider margin than is otherwise the case. And that gives it, the central image, a dignity which others don't have. And I think that's that sense of dignity is important. And I've tried to think about the relationship between mount and image here. The other thing, of course, is color. We live in a very white world. All this is really a white box, white walls. If you go down King Street or any high street, you see in estate agents' windows that everybody lives in white boxes, white spaces. And we've slightly lost, I think, the ability to relate colours in a meaningful and sensitive way. And I think that needs to be thought about. In this COVID period, a lot of children have made rainbows, and the colours are rather crude, but as one might expect. But I think that we adults should think about colour in a more subtle way and be more courageous in using colour, more courageous and more sensitive. And in my own house, I've used upwards of 60 different colours, and I think other people could do the same. We're missing out on a lot if we don't. But the colour of a mount has to relate to the image. It has to be sympathetic to the colour in the image, but not challenge it. And we can see here illustrations of that. So image and colour, I think those are important things generally to think about. But now we could actually look at individual images. I'd like to say something just about each of the 20. This is called Winter Solstice, number 1. And it illustrates for me the transformative potential of this medium, because I was at home one morning and I looked at some feathers in a pot on our windowsill. And I took quite a lot of photos just of this pot and the feathers. And then when they were developed, I started putting them together. And after a while, I realized that I'd lost touch with the feathers in the pot, and that the black and white shapes were beginning to suggest something else, something wintry. And I decided to go with that, and I put in a little low red sun, and there it is. It's winter solstice. It's an image of winter. This one is called Foam, and it refers to a childhood experience that so many have had of standing by the shoreline and watching a wave break into foam that then thins out into overlapping, lacy fan shapes that creep towards you and then die into the sand. It's a beautiful thing to watch, and the water then is sucked back and you get another wave. Okay. This is an image about the playfulness of light, like a shadow play, a puppet show almost, of dangling legs and hands. But it makes me think that light is not just light against dark, but light against heavy. Light is fleet, it's nimble, it's like a dancer. And so I just wanted to try and capture something of that quality that light has. It's playfulness. Rough sea, another image of Cornwall. This illustrates something that happens if you take a number of photographs of something that excites you. You then get them developed, and at home you find, oh dear, if only I had one more, it would be so much more satisfactory. But you can't go back. You know that you have to make do with what you've got. And in this case, I was missing one more image, and I found that I had one of the wood that leads to the rocky shore where the rough sea was. I've emphasized the rough sea, the spume and the spray, by choosing to show a little of the decal edge, the rough edge of the Fabriano paper that I use. In this one, we've gone from Cornwall to Istanbul. It's called Among the Tombs, and there are some very ancient tombs around the central image, which is of colorful clothes on a line, on a washing line in a poor part of the city. Sometimes when you have an intense experience of color, in this case forming a sort of bouquet, you want to isolate it and keep its intensity. And the way to do that, I think, is to tone down everything around it, right down, so that nothing challenges the experience of the color. And I could do this because I'm a very bad photographer. I take a lot of really dud photographs that no respectable photographer would ever take. But they come in handy because here I've used them, these very overexposed images, for that purpose of muting, which I needed. This is called Golden Cap, simply because some of the images relate to a walk up to Golden Cap, which is the headland in Dorset between Bridport and Lyme Regis. But really the image is much more complicated than that, and is just an example of what I spoke about in the statement about visual poetry, and I don't really want to interpret it any more than that. Here we are back in Istanbul. Istanbul is amazingly rich culturally. There was a tremendous amount to see there, but when I was there, there was a certain area of it that is not particularly rich monumentally, but has great atmosphere and has some of these old wooden houses. And it was a place that I loved to walk in. And one bright morning, I walked down the main street of this area called Kanturkaran, if I've pronounced it right. And there was this fat man walking down ahead of me with a great fat shadow, and I followed him until he disappeared into a mosque. And the brightness of the light allowed me to see the beauty of the pavement in Istanbul, reminiscent of the pavements in Paris, where you have these radiating fans, rather like the foam in number 2. But then we also saw that elsewhere in Istanbul there were some very early mosaics where the images are set against creamy white tesserae that are laid out in exactly this fan-shaped pattern. And so it may be the origin, I don't know, but it's very beautiful. This one is called L'inconsolabile, the unconsolable woman. And we're in Palermo, in western Sicily, which I've come to know and love. We're in a cemetery, the main cemetery of the city, and there's a very beautiful Arab Norman church, Santo Spirito, which is surrounded by what to me is rather ugly miscellany of rather baroque and hysterical sculptures and monuments, some very pompous, all rather baroque. And the conjunction of the Arab Norman at the top and all this baroque, but actually 19th century monumental tombs around is quite a clash and quite distressing. But the woman is throwing herself over the tomb of her beloved. She's trying to keep him in some way. She's from death that has raped her, snatched away her beloved. And this theme of rape is actually continued in a funny sort of way in the Arab Norman church, because it was the focus of one of the most important events in Sicilian history, the Sicilian Vespers, in 1282, I think, when a French soldier attempted to rape a Sicilian woman. The Sicilians hated their French Angevin masters, and this was the last straw. They rose up in revolt immediately around the church after the evening service, and the revolt spread all over Palermo and then all over Sicily to Messina, and it might have succeeded if the Pope had intervened on their behalf. It might have succeeded, and the subsequent history of Sicily might have been very different. But there is this resonance, this continuation of a theme of rape of a different kind. This is an image of our small walled London garden. It's called Two Seasons. There were four, but what happens if you take out the transitional ones of spring and autumn and just enjam summer and winter? Can you do it and still make a composition that has some degree of unity? I don't know. This is about vision, the experience of light. For me, can have a visionary quality. And I think it's part of the nature of vision that if it's intense enough, it has the effect of making everything else around it, around that immediate stimulus, quite indistinct, quite dreamlike, rather inchoate. In this lockdown period, we've heard a lot about the light at the end of the tunnel. I think there's something here of a tunnel vision where a lot of dreamlike images surround something that has an extraordinary clarity and beauty. This one is in our garden, and it's called Tendril because we have a sort of arbor where there's a cast iron seat of ironwork, and over and around it is some passion flower, and some honeysuckle. And I was interested in the relationship between the tendril in a plant and ironwork. I'm not the first by any means to have noted this. There was a famous German photographer called Karl Blossfeldt who made lots of photographs, very fine ones, which explored this relationship. And of course Mackintosh, the Scottish architect, got a lot of plant forms into the metalwork in his art school in Glasgow. Here we are still in the garden and still in the arbour, looking out at foliage that is only inches away from me. I call it summer's dance. It was a very still afternoon, there wasn't much movement, but a summer's day can have an element of dance, insects and bees and so on, butterflies, but I think it's more the dance of eye movements. When we look, our eyes are moving about all the time in a kind of dance. This is a still life on our dining table, salt and pepper, and light on the wall behind the table, which was moving in a shaking way because of foliage in the garden. And it illustrates how very mobile light is. It's very quick. It really represents vitality, life, and that's what's beautiful about it, I think. Some of the movement here is a bit like foam in the waves. This is called Frost at Midnight. We're as far from light as you can be. I'm afraid this is the dark night of the soul in a way. It's about the realm of pain and suffering and depression and despair, and if not death, then the fear of death, the fear of dying, all those things which we have to acknowledge, we have to face up to. And sometimes there isn't much consolation. There's a nest here, but the eggs will not hatch because they are made of stone. Somehow the image naturally formed itself into a cross. In this image we are back in the world of light, but of filtered light. Light coming down through the tops of trees. It creates a very special atmosphere under. Something like the atmosphere in a cathedral lit by high windows. This is called crack. It's obviously about fissures in the surface of the earth, fissures in individual stones, but also in human settlements, in towns and villages where narrow streets can form into cracks, into fissures, canyons. It might amuse people to see that the couple in the foreground are reading a newspaper which seems to be about some story to do with crack cocaine. Yeah. This is Nocturne. It's perhaps the most complicated image of the 20. It started out being photographs taken on a very bright morning by a stream, branches over a stream in Leeds, in Yorkshire. But when I started putting the things together, I found, rather as I did with the feathers in a pot, that I lost touch with the bright morning and things started to look like night. And then I thought of Nocturne, and then as I was working on it, I started to think about musical nocturnes, and that leads one to think about Chopin and about piano playing. And so here you get the black and white keys of the piano to some extent, and the intervals between notes, and a general sense of the analogy with music. I haven't very much to say about this one. It's based on some photos of a boat that is moored beneath the Dove's pub down here at Hammersmith Mall. It's really just another example of visual poetry, and there's not much to be said about it. It is what it is. This one interests me because it illustrates what I was talking about earlier about the personal space. Because I know that many artists are at home in great spaces. You think of Turner and alpine valleys and great tracts of sea and sky, and I can respond to that, but I'm actually most at home in a space that is just a few feet in front of me, or just very, very near. Almost the personal space. And this image, it doesn't maybe seem very close, but the images are of branches of a myrtle at the end of our garden, and these branches were very, very near to me, very close. I was back up against the brick wall, and these branches were just very close to me. And out of that proximity, you can perhaps make an image that has a grander, makes a grander scenario. In this last one, we're back in Palermo. It's called Capriccio Siciliano because there are prints that are architectural capricci. They're made up of bits of architecture and sculpture, and this is one of those. Normally, I like people to think of my images as whole images in their entirety, but I will just mention the lit building in the upper part of it. This is quite interesting because it is a palazzo in Palermo that was originally a private dwelling, but about 100 years after the Black Death, the Pestinera, became the city's main hospital. And in the courtyard, a painter, whose name we don't know, painted a great fresco called The Triumph of Death, which was a kind of memento mori, because most of the people who entered the hospital would not have come out of it alive, unfortunately. And of course it has a resonance in this year because so many hospitals in Palermo and all over Italy and all over Europe and all over the world have been filling up with very sick people struggling to live. And, well, that's part of its resonance. I want to end by just saying something about light. It's an obvious preoccupation of mine in this room and altogether. It's something that we do rather take for granted. We wake up in the morning and open our eyes and there it is. But I think we shouldn't take it for granted. And it's interesting to me that not as many artists as you might think have been concerned with light. One thinks of Vermeer, obviously, and Monet and Bonnard and certainly Edward Hopper and some others, but not a great many. But of course it's been a preoccupation of many photographers. Photography, pose and graphy. It's often translated as drawing with light, but I'm not sure that that's quite right, because light is not drawn. This is what Vermeer showed us so beautifully for the first time, really, that there are no edges to light. It's not linear. You have a figure, a woman standing or sitting in a room, and the light enters at a certain angle at a certain time of day, and it models with shadow everything in that room according to a logic that has the elegance and beauty of mathematics, and it can be demonstrated mathematically. But it's so much more. And I find it very moving, really, that that light that has traveled 93 million miles can enter a room and enter your space and can model perfectly an object right in front of you on your table. That is breathtakingly beautiful to me, and I think we shouldn't take it for granted, because some people go blind. I was taught by a man, an artist, who went blind, and one thinks of the very moving anecdote in Vasari of who is from Arezzo, and he remembers the old Piero della Francesca being led round the town by a boy because Piero had gone blind. It's incredibly moving that this man who had painted such a vision of life and whose paintings contain those wide open eyes and such a concern with sight should have lost his vision. And we shouldn't take it for granted, because we shall all go blind in the end. We shall all have to close our eyes and they won't open. So, oh dear, that's ridiculous for me to end in tears, but it is very important that we celebrate light, because it is life in many ways, and it's very alive and very moving in every way.